Hello and welcome to the podcast episode today. And my special guest today is Ella Whitcomb Khan, who I have been chatting with on Instagram via DM for a few months back and forth now. And I love her. I find her fascinating. So I thought she would make an exceptional guest to come on to the podcast because conversations, communication and connection, you don't get anything that ties that up more than somebody that works with other coaches and helping them around behaviour change and psychology and coaching clients. So Ella, thank you for joining me on my podcast today.
It's a pleasure to be here. What a lovely introduction. That was so nice. And we were just saying how lovely it is to kind of like speak face to face and not just in the DM. So no, I'm really happy to be here. So thanks for inviting me on.
You're very welcome. So can you explain to people that haven't spoken to you before or don't know you, what is it that you do?
Oh, such a hard question, isn't it? Okay. Firstly, I'm a lecturer in psychology at the University of Bolton. So I lead on the exercise and behaviour change module to master's students. So that's kind of what I do there. I'm also self-employed, and that entails a couple of things. I consult a fitness company to help them educate their coaches. But I also mostly work by supporting other coaches to help with their clients' psychological barriers. So what a lot of coaches will be aware of is that when they're working with a person, they might ask them to do a certain training program or to eat a certain way. And oftentimes the person isn't able to do that. And coaches understand the importance of psychology in navigating this. And that's where I come in, which is educating on the psychology and behavior change, and also helping coaches to realize how they almost contribute to that dynamic that's going on with a client.
Amazing. And what is it that made you choose psychology as your career, and then specifically helping people in the fitness industry?
Yeah. In terms of psychology, I've always had an obsession with people, human nature, human behavior. It's been very fascinating to me. So that's why psychology generally. I love everything that in terms of studying people, like philosophy and sociology. So that's why psychology. In terms of the fitness industry, I think it was almost stumbled into it, really. I think I had a skill set in terms of psychology and the fascination. I also have an interest in exercise. I'm a trainee sport and exercise psychologist. So there's already that crossover. And for me, it just represented an industry where they really could use some input from more psychologists because of all the messaging that's out there. So I think it's a case of I myself enjoy being active. I myself have had struggles with being active, and I have the psychology background. So that's kind of what led me into the fitness industry.
Kind of makes sense, doesn't it, when you look at it that way? And do you think that you mentioned the messaging that we see out there? Can you explain a bit more about that? Say more about that. Yeah,
I mean, firstly, the messaging is really, really strong. So the first thing that I noticed when I began participating in the fitness industry was how strong and loud the messages sounded. There's a lot of moral components to the fitness industry, which is that, you know, if you can do things a particular way, you seem to be morally superior, or you seem to be a better person, or you seem to be having your life together. And not only are you going to be fitter, you're going to suddenly be successful across all areas of your life and be a better person. I think that's one of the huge component. And therefore, what that really says is that if you're not fit and healthy, then you're actually not a good person, or there's something wrong with you. So I think that's a core message. I also think there was this tendency towards perfectionism, or towards actually unhealthy relationships with food and exercise, things like restriction, consistency, going to the point of perfectionism, things having to be a particular way. It's also not very inclusive. I think about this a lot. It's that, you know, if we say that in order for a person to be healthy, they must consume this protein, they must eat whole foods, they must eat organic foods, well, you've already ruled out half the population who can't afford it, or more people who can't afford it. You're ruling out people who aren't able-bodied. You're ruling out neurodivergent people. So I just feel like as well, it wasn't that inclusive.
Yeah, and I agree with you that, and sometimes we don't necessarily consciously know that that messaging is problematic when we're seeing it, but it will affect how we see ourselves, how we feel about other people as well, not just how we see ourselves, but it might, do you think it can lead into judgment of other people if we are in that headspace and we agree with these messages subliminally and subconsciously? Does that then feed into an unconscious judgment of other people that aren't in that same perspective as us. Does that happen?
I think it does happen. And I think that's when I work with coaches, the first step is to develop self-awareness. So we spend a lot of time on the coach's beliefs and the coach's relationship to food and exercise, because once we understand their relationship to food and exercise, we can quite clearly see how they're perceiving their client. And then the way they perceive their client determines the way they interact with their client, which impacts the way the client's outcomes are. So I definitely feel as though if you've internalized the idea that you're overweight because you're lazy, or if you aren't able to adhere, it's because you don't care and you're not committed. If you internalize that and you believe it about yourself and you believe it about other people, then, well, firstly, if you are a person who's trying to be active, if you believe that not doing it means you're lazy and you're not committed and there's something wrong with you, that is not the conditions that are required in order to facilitate change. What that's going to do is facilitate feelings of shame, guilt, embarrassment, stress. What's wrong with me? And it's going to actually create a negative spiral, taking you further and further away from what you want. Now, in terms of how does it impact your relationship with somebody else? Well, if I think that they don't adhere means they're lazy, well, then the next time I jump on a call with them or I check in with them, I'm thinking, well, this person's lazy. Like, what's the point? Why are they paying me to coach? It's them, it's them, it's them. And all the while, we're not thinking, how am I contributing to this dynamic? What am I seeing here? How are my biases getting in the way?
Yeah. And it's really interesting that impact of self-awareness, that importance of self-awareness, we don't see that talked about very much at all. And I think that, like, from my perspective, the more that I've got into coaching and learning about how I coach and frameworks for coaching, and I see not necessarily problems, but my own biases come up quite a lot. And I think that my experience with therapy, so I've had therapy a number of times and coaching a number of times, and I think that every time I unpeel a new layer, like the layers of an onion, and I unpeel an uncomfortable truth about myself, it definitely then changes how I coach other people. Mm-hmm. And that self-awareness, I think, is really key as a coach. And I think that's why supervision and sometimes having somebody come in and pick apart almost what you're doing with your clients and sort of hold that mirror up as a self-reflection and say, well, maybe you're the problem. Maybe it's not you're attracting the wrong clients with your messaging. Maybe you are the problem, the common denominator here. And do you think that's more common than not, that the coaches and the fitness influencers and the diet people that we see online, the weight loss, if we call it the fitness, weight loss and nutrition space to be like encompassing, do you see that that's problematic all the way through those industries?
Yeah, I think it is problematic. But the thing is, it's actually also a good thing. If we realize that maybe there's a way that we're contributing to the dynamic, you have far more control and ability to change it. So like you mentioned the words, uncomfortable truths, it's never nice to think, oh, I'm maybe contributing to my client's outcomes and maybe I'm not doing something right. Like, that is quite painful and uncomfortable and difficult to hear. However, the way you could see it is that, oh, great, now I've unlocked this treasure chest of knowledge that's already within me that I can change, that's going to improve my client outcomes. And the client has not been required to do a single thing differently. So, but you're right. I do think that it is a problem. And I think that firstly, people don't think it's a problem, so it never actually gets addressed. So it just keeps getting perpetuated. And then the messaging gets louder, which is like, no, it's your fault. You're lazy. You're not committed. You're not caring. And all that's doing is it's increasing those negative feelings, like we said before, and it's reducing the responsibility of the coach. I think it stems a lot from, we were talking earlier about coaching models, and you said you're exploring your own kind of coaching models. Well, there is never any emphasis in developing a coaching model or a framework or an approach when you become a fitness coach, nutrition coach, strength and conditioning coach. That is not part of it. So what tends to happen is you take an automatic approach, which is that I'm the expert, I've got all the knowledge, and so therefore the client is the person on the receiving end of my expertise. So you've already created a dynamic there where the person listens to your expertise. And that is not the most facilitative environment to create for change. We want a dynamic, as you'll know, like more person-centered, more collaborative, where we work together on a solution. I think that's the start of the problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's the difference between somebody that's just training and sharing lessons and somebody that's actually coaching. One is there's definitely a hierarchy of I'm the expert or I'm the boss and you do as you're told. Mm-hmm. And the other one is a collective, collaborative, experience.
And actually,
so behaviour change.
Yeah, so
go on, sorry.
And one there, like what we often get is a coach will be a personal trainer first, won't they? So it's kind of like, you might be an excellent personal trainer because you're so good at training a person in a skill that they need to develop in the gym. But the issue that we're having now is a huge movement towards online coaching, which is great. But a coach is very different to a trainer, and a coach is an expertise. It's a skill set. It's so difficult to be a fantastic coach. And actually, when you notice fantastic coaching in action, it looks so obvious. You're like, oh, you're just having a conversation. But the skill and the level of expertise that's required to make it look like just a conversation is enormous. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
No, that's really interesting because I know when I've had coaching myself, and it has by the end of a session just felt like a wonderful connected conversation. But at the end of it, my mindset has been different and I'm prepared to take action on something. And I do often go, how did that happen? Because that was just a conversation. And that's something that I'm hoping will come through this podcast, is listening to conversations and people just being able to pick out aha moments for themselves and taking small learnings and maybe hearing something that will trigger that point of action for them. You've mentioned behaviour change a couple of times, which is a term that we hear talked about quite a lot within the fitness and health space. So what does it mean and why is it relevant?
Okay, so when we're talking about behaviour change, I guess there's two sides of it. There's the side where we want to stop a behaviour or reduce a behaviour. And then there's the other side of it where we want to either start a behaviour or increase a behaviour. So that's what we mean by behaviour change. We're starting, stopping, reducing or increasing a behaviour. And the reason why it's relevant is that really what we're saying is a healthy person and an unhealthy person, the only way that they're different is through their behaviours. A healthy person's behaviours are different to an unhealthy person's behaviour. So the whole purpose of the fitness industry is to help a person to engage in behaviours that's more aligned with the goal or more aligned with what they want. So that's why behaviour change is so important. I guess the barrier is the realisation that behaviour change is very psychological in nature, and there are things that we can do that almost makes behaviour change more difficult, and there's things that we can do that facilitates it.
Yeah. And when it comes to behaviour change and getting somebody to address a negative or unwanted or unwarranted behaviour, it isn't as simple as creating the awareness for them and then giving them a new behaviour to adopt, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's not, because otherwise they would have already been doing that, firstly. So there are reasons why they are currently doing what they're doing, and we have to understand that. So there's a function to all behaviours. It may not make sense to you as the coach why a person is completely inactive, or why a person seems to eat a lot of food in the evenings, or why they say they might want to lose weight but then they don't do the stuff. It might not make sense to you, but as humans, our behaviour makes a lot of sense. That's the great thing about us. There's a function to that behaviour. The function might be that it helps their boredom. That function might be that it's helping them to manage difficult emotions. That function might be that it's protecting them from a self-esteem that they feel like if they fail, that it's going to be really painful. So firstly, that's why they can't just stop doing it, because it's serving a really important function. And so in order for that person to be able to change, they have to find a behaviour that continues to serve that function, but in a way that's more conducive to the goal.
Amazing. And you mentioned inclusivity before. And when we're talking about behaviour change and helping people moving towards wanted and healthful behaviours, ableism and neurotypical bias is pretty much where the bulk of the messaging starts and is loudest. So what are some of the barriers when you're talking about people that are less able-bodied or neurodivergent, or not your, I hate to use this phrase, but typical normal person?
Yeah.
What are some of the barriers that you can come up against, and how do we help people understand that that's even a thing they need to be aware of?
That's a great question. Well, firstly, the fact that most coaches aren't aware of it means that they assume that everybody is normal, everybody is typical, everybody is just able to do the thing that you have asked of them, and if they aren't doing it, it's because that there's something wrong with them, they don't care. So firstly, the place we come from was already, we have an approach that's assuming something. Okay, I suppose let's start with neurodivergence, and I suppose I have the better knowledge of autism and ADHD, for example. So if we're a fitness professional, we know that we want somebody to help somebody to develop consistency. And so ultimately we want person to consistently start to exercise frequently at a certain amount of times per week. We probably want the person to engage in some self-monitoring. So they are noting down what they've done. They're monitoring their behavior. We probably need the person to start doing some planning, like, okay, you've got a busy week ahead. When might you go for a run? When might you do this? Now, we are probably assuming that the person has that capability of doing those things, because we can do it. We're adults. It's not hard. People should be able to do it. But I don't know, you might be able to comment on this as well. But for somebody, for example, who has ADHD, consistency is not necessarily how their brain works. It might work in kind of pulses of energy. So you could go for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks where you're extremely hyper focused, and suddenly you cannot get out of the gym because you love the gym, and it's you're Googling about the gym and you're thinking about the gym and you just want to be in the gym. And then all of a sudden, for absolutely no reason, and not because they're a bad person and not because they're lazy, they will suddenly lose complete interest in the gym, and the motivation will get to zero, and they won't understand it. There wouldn't have been a reason for this to happen. And then suddenly there's a new hyperfixation. Now, as coaches, if we're not aware that this process is going to occur, we might think, well, what's just gone wrong? You were doing great. What's now just happened? So it's about firstly understanding that that's the natural cycle maybe of somebody who has ADHD, and then also working with them to say, right, well, what can we do about this? How can we put strategies in place that are gonna help you? So I don't know, I'll pause there for a second and see if you've got anything around that.
Yeah, so I'm currently going through an official ADHD diagnosis for myself, but it really resonates with me when we talk about particularly healthful behaviours and gyms, and my own experience with hyperfocus. And so for me, I have gone through various different types of fitness. So I've done the typical mum yoga, I've done legs, bums and tums, I did X bikes when they came out, I did Zumba, then I moved to the next thing, and then the next thing, I've done CrossFit, and then I did bodybuilding and photo shoot prep. And each time that I've suddenly switched to something new, I've just thought that it was a progression that everybody did, and that it was just me improving myself and working towards a healthier, fitter version of me. And it was only when I did my bodybuilding photo shoot, and then probably about a year and a half later, I was still in the gym going through the motions, and then the pandemic hit, and then I didn't have that anymore. And then I spent months feeling like almost like a bereavement of, wow, I can't do that thing anymore. What else? What can I do? And I tried to recreate the same effect at home, and it fell flat. And my motivation for training disappeared, literally disappeared overnight. And I was like, well, I'm obviously just lazy and undisciplined and shit. And people that are really into fitness and really care about their health don't have this problem. So I kind of ignored it and buried it and squashed it down by just eating what the hell I wanted, and indulging in, I mean, it was the pandemic, indulging in like alcohol and cooking from home and baking bread and making cakes, like all of the things that everybody suddenly took up as new hobbies. But I carried on walking. So walking for me every day is almost like my inner sat-nav, my inner anchor. It's how I centre myself. And I didn't realise that this has become my non-negotiable, something that I just do that makes sense. And like the rest of my life revolves around that walk. And then when the pandemic lifted and I could go back to the gym, could I find any motivation to do that? Absolutely not. And for about a year and a half, I really struggled. I tried different coaches, I tried different approaches, and it was only through talking to a few people about neurodivergence, and I'd been investigating it for a while anyway, that they said this is probably attached to your need for hyperfocus and excitement and interest, and maybe that's just waned.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've actually done is I've replaced fitness with Formula One.
Oh, cool.
which is now my hyper-focus interest. But knowing that I'm going to throw myself fully into this for a while, and it could last years, it could last months. But I think if I'd had a coach that understood that might be what was going on, there could have been an easier solution
100%.
for that. And then that brings me nicely into the next question, really, was that what's got me back to a healthy approach to nutrition and fitness has been knowing what my core values in life are, and knowing the reasons why I want to be healthy and the reasons why I like to feel fit and strong, rather than it being just something I do to look a certain way for a certain result. It's, I do this because it makes me who I am. And core values and strengths have helped me move forward with my goals and where I want to be in life. And I know that this is something that you work on with your coaching clients, and also probably within the wider sphere of the master's students that you help. So how do core values and strengths impact goal setting from a psychological point of view? Okay.
Love it. Firstly, yeah, I love hearing about your experience. And it's also sad at the same time, because this ties into values. So the messaging of the fitness industry is that there is one way to be fit and healthy, and there's one way to be successful, and it falls within these parameters, and that is the way to do it, right? So what tends to happen is there's these things called interjected values, which are values from the world around us that we absorb and we take them as our own, and we think they're our own. So we start going to the gym because we think we're supposed to like it, and we start going to the gym. If I was a person who cared about my health, I would go to the gym and I would do it consistently, and I would eat enough protein, and I would look a particular way. And if I don't, then I clearly don't care about it, because that's an interjected value. That's taken from somebody else telling us what we should and shouldn't be doing, what we should and shouldn't feel. And it's particularly difficult for people with neurodivergence, because we're picking up social cues from other people. So we're very susceptible to other people's values, because we're trying to make sure, are we acting appropriately? Is this the way that it's supposed to be? So we're quite sensitive to interjected values, say. Now, the importance of knowing our own values is that it allows us to do things that are aligned with who we really are, and it allows us to recognize an interjected value or not. Because what happens with an interjected value is that we start experiencing a lot of shame, guilt, embarrassment. I must be lazy. You said the word yourself. So we keep thinking there's something wrong with us. Like, why does everybody else seem to get it, and I cannot even seem to just keep on going to the gym? Whereas if, for example, we realize fundamentally, I need variety in my life. Fundamentally, I need adventure. Then we can say, all right, well, at the moment, I'm getting a bit of adventure from going to the gym. But when that stops, there's nothing wrong with me. I just need a different sense of adventure. So by being clear on our values, it cultivates, I think, self-acceptance. And self-acceptance is the most important thing. It's accepting what truly we value and having the courage and the bravery to actually do the things that we truly value. And I guess the way that it would work is that we help somebody to identify what they truly value. We help them to identify what their strengths are. And then from that would turn into a goal. And then the goal would turn into daily action. And that's how it would follow through. But I guess also in terms of neurodivergence, the goal isn't actually that important. I don't know if you felt this as well. Like maybe you might feel as though you want to lose weight. And so you work with a coach and you put that as the goal. And then suddenly when you don't start doing the things, the coach might say, oh, but I thought you said you wanted to lose weight. I think really the goal isn't really that important. What's important is that you're living in the way that's aligned with your values, and that you're doing stuff in the moment that feels right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that personally, from my experience and a couple of people that I know who are ADHD, that dopamine is the reason why we do things. That's what drives action. Particularly for me, I know that if I'm doing something that's interesting, exciting, or makes me feel good, or I know that I'm going to get something out of it, I'm on it and I can stick to it. And it was almost feedback from my coaches that I was doing the right things, that I was doing well, and that I was hitting my targets, and seeing the streak on my Fitness Pal of me hitting my protein and calorie targets consistently, that was feeding my behaviour. And when I look back on it, it was borderline obsessive. Well, it was obsessive. There wasn't a day where I couldn't do it. And even now, I still am very conscious of, if I track something, I need to remind myself that my value around this, and pull myself back away from that data kind of, you're doing well, pat on the back. It's quite, for me, it was quite a realization, and almost like a really emotional experience, actually, for me to go, oh, crap. I was doing that because of that reason, not because I was disciplined or because I was driven. I was doing it because it was actually borderline unhealthy for me. Yeah. And that wasn't an indication that I was doing well. It was just I was able to stick to a behaviour that was driven by dopamine hits and external validation. And
this is the issue in general with praise. And I think it's another problem. It affects everybody, whether you're neurodivergent or not. It's that as coaches, we think we're doing the right thing by praising somebody. Wow, you keep doing all your workouts. That's great. And yes, it's important to do praise because it reinforces that behavior is good. But like you said, it's also a slippery slope. Ultimately, we don't need our coach's praise. We don't need our coach to tell us, well done, you've met my demands of you, and I'm pleased with you. It's not really, doesn't matter, really. It shouldn't matter. Yeah. We should be pleased with ourselves, and it's about building those internal systems. And actually, research has constantly shown that the more external rewards we have, it actually undermines our intrinsic motivation. You may love running and you're intrinsically motivated to run. The second that the coach gets you to track it, and then suddenly you're seeing it on Strava and suddenly you're getting praise for it, suddenly the intrinsic motivation declines and we start focusing on the extrinsic. So when the extrinsic changes and suddenly they're not happy with us, or we didn't run the time we wanted to run, we now suddenly don't feel motivated. Whereas before, we ran because we enjoyed it. So there's that definite balance in general in coaching to try to move away too much from giving praise, because praise can be controlling, the same way as if you were to criticize someone.
Yeah, it sounds an awful lot like how we should approach parenting as well, like that external validation and that focus on results and data and end games about pushy parents that we see all the time, parents that are super competitive and want their children to be the best violinist or the best cross-country runner. So they take the passion that the child has got and then they turn it into this big life goal that you can see sucks the fun out of it for the child. So I think that's important as parents to reflect on that. Extrinsic validation all the time is actually taking away from their own sense of pride and achievement.
100%. A better question or a better thing to do would be, how did that feel? Kind of, at the end of the week, and, maybe I jump on the call with a coach and I say, oh, I did all 3 of my sessions this week. And typically a coach might say, oh, you smashed it. Well done. You're smashing the adherence. You're really consistent. Brilliant. How about the question just be, and how does that feel? And then I'm like, I feel so pleased and proud that I've managed to do that, right? So we're shifting the emphasis, and rather than the coach saying that they're proud, you're saying that you're proud. You feel better about yourself. That is important. Same as in parenting, same with friendships across different domains. It's measuring ourselves against our own standards.
Yeah, amazing advice. So you've obviously faced adversity or hardship in your life, because every single person in the world comes across adversity and hardship. So how have you worked through that? Have you used your psychology training as you've got older to almost therapy yourself out of it? Or have you sought external help? What are your strategies for?
Strategies, I think, depends on the adversity. Firstly, to accept that adversity is essential, acceptable, and okay. That's the first thing. There's a lot of messaging that tells you that we shouldn't be experiencing sadness, adversity, stress, and that we've got to eradicate it. Firstly, you've got to, in my mind, it's about embracing that experience, and it's all part of the human experience. So I think that's one part of it. And so if we are going to embrace it, though, we also want support. So I think you've got to attack it at all angles. If it's an adversity that's particularly strong and difficult, then external support is always helpful. Myself, I engage in therapy, been working with my current therapist for almost a year now. That's an important source for me. Obviously, my fiance, she's an important source for me. So external help, definitely the psychology that I've picked up along the way. I subscribe a lot to the existential view on issues. And what the existential view says is that a lot of anxiety, for example, if we just use anxiety, a lot of anxiety is caused by existential issues. And for example, the fact that we have total responsibility over our life, and there's a lot of anxiety that comes from realizing that we have to take responsibility for things, and it requires a lot of courage to take responsibility. It also requires a lot of courage to be authentic and to actually be able to be yourself. And a lot of distress is caused from not being able to be yourself. You're chasing the wrong goals. You're chasing the wrong path in life. You are not standing up for yourself. You're not saying the things that you should say, because we're not being true to who we are. And that causes a lot of anxiety. So I think a lot of what I have done through adversity is try to go back to who I am and try to remind myself of what's important. And as long as I'm acting in line with who I am, then everything else is okay. You know, you allow it to be there. You might use an acceptance commitment approach if you want to hear about all the approaches. You might make space for your emotions. You might accept them. You allow them to flow through. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot in there, maybe.
There is, but I think what's really key, and what I've picked from that, is that it's just an awareness of self and what you're actually going through, and that you have control over some of that. Yeah.
And
amazing.
It's viewing it. There's a lot of research on, it's like called post-traumatic growth, and the research does not suggest that trauma is a good thing, that you should go through it. But there's a lot of research to suggest that people do change after very difficult times, and that actually people say that was a huge turning point for me, or that was a critical moment. And it's because when you have these huge moments, you're confronted with the decision to say, this is really painful. Where do I want to go from here? And you almost get a chance to reinvent things moving forward. So yeah, definitely an awareness, knowing who you are, being in touch with yourself, being willing to experience the experience, not trying to push it away. Those are all important parts.
Fantastic advice. How can we look after our own mental health? This is a big question, I appreciate, and isn't a one size fits all thing. But what can we do individually that will help us look after our mental health?
Good question. Huge question. Okay. I think the simplest way I can put this is paying attention, really, 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 really close attention to your experience, and really understanding how things make you feel, and then doing something about it. So quite simply, if we start paying attention to our experience, and I notice that, when I'm around this person, I feel quite defensive. I feel sad. I feel stressed. To look after our well-being and our mental health would then to say, that's how I feel. I validate how I feel. I accept how I feel. I trust that's how I feel. I'm not going to speak to this person as much. That is like, for me, it's with all of it. It's that if I realize that being indoors all day it makes me feel really bad about myself and really sad, then realizing that a walk is essential for me. For you, you said it anchors you. So looking after your mental well-being is understanding that that's a fundamental part of your life. It's a fundamental part of your well-being. And so doing that thing, making sure that you're able to do that thing. And then you've got the stuff that is just helpful for everybody, which is to be connected to other people, be pursuing something that you find meaningful and worthwhile, to be part of something that's bigger than yourself as well. You know, exercising, eating well, sleeping well, you know, all that stuff as well is really important, of course.
Yeah. And I think people really struggle with the emphasis of self-care, and that some people, I know particularly primary caregivers, mums and dads, who are focused solely on raising their children, quite often take on board this guilt of putting themselves first, that they should always put the children first. And regardless of how they feel about things, I'm just going to do what's right for the children, even if this is detrimental to my mental health. It's such a pattern I see an awful lot, that people are so unwilling to put themselves first because they see it as being selfish.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's that there's a story there. There's a story and a belief. The story is that if I don't devote myself 100% to my children and I put myself second, then I am selfish, and I am not a loving mother or a father. I'm not a good parent, and ultimately I will have failed as a parent. So there's a whole story that's wrapped up in a hell of a lot of beliefs there that come down to a lot of your conditions of worth and your core beliefs about what it means to be a parent, but which takes time to unpack. It's also the culture. You feel guilty for not doing that. But it's also about understanding that looking after yourself, if we frame it as selfish, then of course we're not going to want to do it. But if we realize that it's probably the least selfish thing that we can do, and that otherwise what's happening? What's happening is that we're getting smaller and smaller as a person. We're losing touch with who we are. We don't even know how to look after ourselves. And so what's that going to lead to? It's going to lead to resentment. It's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to stress. All of the things that are not conducive to being kind, loving, caring, because how can you physically be kind, loving, caring when you have nothing left to give? So it shouldn't be seen as a luxury or something that makes you selfish. It is essential.
Yeah. And I go through this with some of my clients around boundaries for how you want to spend time, how you want people to treat you and talk to you. And one of the things is nearly always around, well, I don't get time to do this for myself because I'm so busy doing this for other people. And sometimes it's just that simple mind shift for them of, well, if you spent time doing the things that you love, you are going to be less resentful, and you are going to actually potentially enjoy doing things for other people more because you've filled up your own cup first. And sometimes I think just framing it that way for people, and the famous old saying that gets spewed out a lot of put your own oxygen mask on before you help other people, but people still don't equate that with putting yourself first, filling up your own cup, knowing what serves you. That's such an alien concept for people, and it's only through like when they get to the point of burnout or stress or that point of friction that makes them take notice that they start to look at and maybe unpack what's gone wrong and why they've got to that point and why they feel that way about that particular thing. And that's what happened with me when I came to understand that if I don't go out for a walk, if I don't get fresh air, then I literally feel claustrophobic and caged. And if I don't have time by myself enough, so I like to be completely by myself, I am actually very much okay in my own company. If I've had a busy weekend of socialising, or even just the kids have been around all weekend, I need to have a good 1 to 2 hours by myself in order to decompress. Otherwise, I'm just horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a few things. So one of the biggest ways that children learn is through observation and vicarious learning. So really, sometimes we might want to act like the martyr and be like, I'm doing all this stuff, which only you recognize, by the way. People wouldn't even notice if you weren't even doing half of these things, because that's like maybe love languages, for example. You might think that you're being so loving because you're doing all the work around the house when really nobody actually gives two craps about it. But that's another thing. But, so I forgot my train of thought now. I've got after going off on...
Go back to love languages, because I really like that concept. So I've talked about that a lot recently with clients. So talk about love languages.
I mean, I don't know if necessarily it's the most scientifically backed, but I just think it's a helpful framework in that maybe as a parent, we're doing all of these things thinking that we need to be completely available all the time and thinking that we need to give everything because that's a sign of love. When actually maybe your child perceives love or receives love in a way that's like time together or words of affirmation. So you're now doing 5,000 things around the house because you think you need to, and you think it's because you have to, when actually it's not even getting recognized. All it's doing is creating a lot of stress for you. So kind of understanding the languages in which we speak with each other and meeting people there can be quite helpful maybe. And I think I remember what I said now, which is about we learn through modeling and stuff like that. It's that what we want for our children is that they're going to grow up and know how to meet their own needs and know how to express their needs and put their needs first. And how are they going to be able to do that? They do that from learning. They learn from when you say to them, not right now, I'm going to go and play tennis, or I'm going to go for my walk, and when I come back, we're going to have time together. That's teaching them a message. It's not teaching them, oh, you don't matter. It's teaching them, oh, I matter, But there's also boundaries, and that's a normal way of living. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. boundaries are really important, and I've found that the more that I am aware of boundaries for myself, like you say, it sets me up for a much more positive and compassionate approach to other people, rather than, and I think it's Brené Brown who says you can't have full compassion or empathy if you harbour resentment in any way. Without boundaries,
and that's
boundaries,
why, again, I know everyone says to be true to who you are, and people don't really understand what that means, but that's why it's really, really, really important. If you are doing everything for your child, but underneath it, you feel a slight bit of resentment, or you wish that you had time to yourself because you know you really need it, then you need to go and have time by yourself, and you need to do the thing. Because exactly that, you can't fully be empathetic or fully be compassionate when you have these things, these of your own needs that you're ignoring. You have to attend to them because they're going to come out anyway. You're going to be slightly less patient. You're going to be not listening as well as you wanted to do. Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we practice. We practice meeting our own needs, which allows us to meet other people's needs. We practice saying no to ourselves. It's all a dynamic as well.
Yeah, and that comes back to like self-compassion, doesn't it? And talk to me about self-compassion from the perspective of psychology and how you approach it.
Yeah, self-compassion is one of the most misunderstood terminologies, and it's something that, I don't know if you find this, but you mention it and everyone's like, no, whoa, I don't need more of that. If I don't treat myself like crap and basically bully myself, then I'm not going to get anything done. So that fundamentally there's a concern here, but it also shows how hard it is for people. Self-compassion is vital. There's been so much research by this point on self-compassion that demonstrates that those who are self-compassionate take on harder tasks. Those who are self-compassionate are more persistent. Those who are self-compassionate have more well-being. They're better able to engage in difficult things, because engaging in difficult thing is obviously hard. There's going to be challenges on the way. So you need as much support as possible. And the support first and foremost comes from us. So self-compassion is very much a soothing mechanism, but it doesn't just mean that you just say, okay, I'm letting myself off to do anything. Self-compassion is also sometimes knowing when you need to do something. It's knowing that you need to go for that walk. It's the right thing to do for you is to go for that walk. That would be self-compassion. It wouldn't be saying, oh yeah, don't worry, just lay in bed and watch Netflix and hide for the day. And because that's not going to make you feel better. Self-compassion is moving towards things that are healing, that make you feel good, Yeah.
So self-compassion is as much a arm around the shoulder as it is a kick up the arse.
Basically. Yeah. It's the way you do it. I don't know. I think people get on board more with the term inner coach, as opposed to an inner critic. So, okay, at the moment you're an inner critic, you're shouting at yourself, you're bullying yourself. So there's a part of you that's being criticized. And how does that part of you that's being criticized feel? And can we move towards an inner coach? Okay, in this moment, what do you really need? I need to be seen. I need to be heard. Okay, can you provide that? Can you meet your own need there? And so the more that we are self-critical, we're actually just ignoring our own needs. So we have to start learning, how would we coach ourselves? Understanding, what do I actually need? Can I provide that need? And understanding that that's more conducive really to a better well-being and life in general.
Yeah, I love the concept of self-compassion and the inner coach versus inner critic stuff. I find that that's been super powerful for me to have an awareness around. When it comes to mental health as a wider topic, we see an awful lot of messaging of it's okay not to be okay, it's good to talk to your friends. Why do you think, with all of this messaging that we're seeing, that there is still a stigma around mental health? People are still not able to ask for the help that they need, or even communicate that they might need help.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between talking about day-to-day problems that are stressing you out, and definitely it would be great to reach out to more people and tell them about these day-to-day things that are stressing you out. Oh, Tanya, this morning I got this difficult email, it was so hard, and then we chat about it and I feel better and I've offloaded, and that's fantastic. The issue is, if I was to suddenly go to a random friend of mine and start saying, I think I have depression, or I think I have severe anxiety, or something else, that friend has absolutely no idea what to do about that. Like, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I've trained for 7 years, so I'm a psychologist. I'm a sport and exercise psychologist in training, but I'm not a clinical psychologist. So whilst I might be in a better position to provide that space, and I might be in a better position to support somebody who might say something like that to me, I still wouldn't necessarily know specifically what to do and say, right? So I think ultimately there's a lot of stigma and issues still, because as the general population, we wouldn't know what to say to a friend who says something serious. And that's the problem. We need people to go and speak to professionals, which is extremely inaccessible, very expensive, very hard. If you're struggling, the last thing you want to do is go online, lists and lists of people that you don't know, have to reach out to them and set up a thing. I also think there's an issue in that. So we know that suicide rates for males are really, really high. It's unacceptable, right? So it's like, oh, just talk to your mates. But if a guy was to say to another guy, I'm having these thoughts, I don't know that the typical guy would have any idea what to say, or that if anything he did say would suddenly be able to change that. It'd be way better than that person not speaking. It would be way better for that person to be heard and feel supported. Absolutely. Those conversations are so important. But then there's another layer that's needed, and then there needs to be professional help. And I also think the issue is that whilst maybe society or the everyday person is understanding to things like anxiety and depression, there are certain disorders that are very, very taboo. We want to talk about mental health if it's anxiety and depression. We don't want to talk about mental health if it's schizophrenia, psychosis, borderline personality disorder, OCD, because then it suddenly becomes, oh no, I didn't mean that. I meant these ones that I can kind of understand.
The nice Instagrammable
100%.
ones.
And I think that's another problem as well. It's kind of, yes, mental health, maybe if you look at it as a scale, so we all have mental health and some of us can maybe have mental illness. But when we really talk about mental illness, that's not the stuff that the everyday person wants to necessarily hear about.
No, because that's painful and potentially it's just a difficult conversation, isn't it? That people would feel inadequate. I think inadequate is I know that if somebody approached me and was struggling, I'd want to support them. I would feel wholly inadequate to do so.
100%. And we are inadequate to help it because they need professional help. But I think as well, I guess the best thing that we can do is that if anybody ever does feel like they can confide in us, which is amazing, because firstly, you're doing something right if somebody feels like they can confide in you. But secondly, no matter how uncomfortable and inadequate you feel and how much it's bringing up for you, because maybe they've mentioned something that you may experience, but you don't want to deal with yet, not to shut that person down.
Yeah.
Not to say it's all going to be okay and, oh, it's all right, mate, everything's fine. We need to also be able to just listen and to just hold the space and to just not have to fix it and to not have to shut it down, which is extremely uncomfortable. And again, it's not like people have training in this. People don't know how to hold a space. People don't know how to not shut something down. People don't know the right thing to say. So I think it's a very challenging issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you just said there about just being able to listen and not shut someone down and almost gloss over the issue is really helpful information. Ella, thank you so much for this conversation. I have really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that the people who are listening take something valuable from this forward. So tell me, where can people find out more information about you if they want to dig into Ella Whitcomb Khan's information and resources? Where will people find you?
Thank you. I've also loved the conversation, and again, I hope people found it useful. Best place to get me is on Instagram, which would be at the Fitness Psych _ DM there. Best place to start. If you want to get some free information, it's on there. I have a podcast called the Fitness Psych Podcast. That's free. Email list, free. Those are the places to start that I'd say if people are interested, they can get hold of me in those ways.
Amazing. Thank you again, Ella, for joining me. All of Ella's information will be in the show notes if you want to pop along down there, and there'll be clickable links.